Good evening. Hello. Thank you. Such a pleasure to see you, and I really appreciate you coming out to hear something about this story. I had a co-host that was supposed to be with me, a musician that was going to present some of our music to you from the book. We've created a musical, and we're starting to tour, and we're really excited about that. But I'll give you more information about that at the end of the program. But she couldn't be here because of a family emergency, but we're going to forge ahead. So I'm going to be reading to you from this book, so I guess some of you are probably wondering, what is all of this about? How many of you have ever heard of the Harlem Hellfighters? Oh, wow, we have somebody great. Well, what do you know?
Well, I just know that they were formed in Harlem and went off to fight in World War I and had a very high reputation.
Oh, wonderful. You got it just right. They were formed in Harlem partly because the NAACP, kept pressing the government saying, let some of our men fight also. So it was a big deal. It was a special thing that they were trying to do. It was kind of an experiment to see what would happen. And yeah, you got it right. And they turned out to be the best soldiers in the war. Arguably, they won the war. But people don't talk about that. They don't let them tell that part of the story. But they never lost a foot of ground in the war, and that's like major. They were never captured, and they forged the furthest into Germany, crossed over into Germany. They got farther than any of the other Allied troops. And they also fought in a couple of major pivotal battles. So they were quite the asset to the country. But the other part that most people don't know, they don't know any of it anyway, but this little known story, they were not allowed to fight with the American forces, even though they were American soldiers, because they were black. So instead, they fought for the French army. So they were put on loan when they got there. When they first got there to Paris, to France, they were put on menial jobs, stevedore, building dams and things like that. Menial work. They were not allowed to fight at first, but they kept pressing, and their commanders, they had some white commanders that believed in them and what they were doing, and they took it from there, and they were the first ones on the line. They were the first ones in the battle before the white soldiers. The white soldiers came later. These black soldiers were the first ones. So there's a lot to know about this, and it's a little known story, and it's just now being told 100 years later. One of their main soldiers just got his medal from the war a few years ago. So you talk about 100 years later. It's just terrible. They were denied their medals even though they won the war. They were sent home, stripped of their uniforms. They couldn't even come home in their uniforms, stripped of their uniforms. And unfortunately, a lot of them, David gulped, "Mama real sick. I don't know if we can afford to keep living in Harlem." "Who told y'all asses to stay up there?" Nathan asked. He continued to play. David was stunned by the question. He felt anger rise up, but he swallowed it. He wiped away an ashy tear. "You left us there. Daddy, please." "You gotta get, boy," Nathan said. "Ain't nothing I can give y'all. You still got that cornet I gave you?" "Yes, sir." Nathan stopped playing and swiveled on his son. His eyes were black holes. Sell that. That's the end of the prologue. So now we enter the first part of the book, where David is an adult now, adult soldier. Part 1, that night. The French people knew no color line. All they seemed to want to know that night was that a great national holiday of their ally was being celebrated, and that made the celebration one of their own. The spirit of emotional enthusiasm had got into the blood of our men, and they played as I had never heard them play before. That was Captain Major Arthur Little, 369th U.S. Infantry Regiment, Lincoln's birthday concert, Opera House, Nantes, France, February 12, 1918. Chapter 1. France, the Western Front, 1918. On the night of Abraham Lincoln's birthday, the fires of war streaked across France's sky. A dogfight between French and German fighter planes sparked and buzzed in the distance. Moonlight fell like a cascade down over an opera house below, setting it aglow. Tuxedoed men and bejeweled women in floor-length gowns glided up marble steps under the watchful gaze of armed French and American soldiers. The mayor of Nantes greeted guests in the entrance with a sweaty brow. Military vehicles flanked the Nantes Opera House's perimeter. Inside, the all-white audience looked on curiously as a band played on stage. This was a band like they had never seen or heard before. Black soldiers from America who played French marches and classical overtures. David Pierce was one of those soldiers. He raised his cornet to his lips. He was joined by his second, Jimmy, a chipper young man and inspiring friend. What a strange sight, one old French woman sniffed as she watched the show. Who took the time to train them to play like that? How long do we have to listen, Father? A little girl speaking in French in ribbons and bows begged. Can we have a treat afterwards? The father patted her head. Not much longer, dear, I'm sure. Halfway through the show, Lieutenant James Reese Europe, the conductor, faced polite applause from the audience. His eyes were large behind round spectacles. At his gesture, the Harlem Hellfighters regimental band, all 40 of them, stood behind him and bowed. Everything about the band was strange, from the warm brown to black colors of each player's skin to the types of instruments they played, some the audience had never seen before, especially the saxophone. In the crowd, an old man nodded off. On stage, Lieutenant Europe motioned for the band to resume their seats. As they did so, one player's chair squeaked. A lone snicker from the crowd filled the air, followed by a cough. Lieutenant Europe gave the player a look. Behind David and Jimmy, the percussion twins, two brothers, rustled. They appeared to disagree about something. Jimmy turned around to watch, but David nudged him to turn back around. The twins frowned at each other as they switched places. Their shoes squeaked. Someone in the audience coughed again. Lieutenant Europe gave the twins a look. The twins stopped bustling and saluted awkwardly. One twin took up his drumsticks, the other a large set of cymbals. They were ready. The band waited as the MC took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he said in French, our esteemed guests will now entertain you with some songs from America in honor of their great president, Abraham Lincoln. Under Lieutenant Europe's direction, the band played The Stars and Stripes Forever. By the end, the room was ringing with applause. The band then played some plantation melodies from the American South. Women dabbed at tear-filled eyes with embroidered handkerchiefs. And then came the fireworks, the Memphis Blues. The band's arrangement of W.C. Handy's classic was now their hit song back home, as it would now be in France. The band members half closed their eyes and seemed to forget where they were. They were no longer in the States, bracing themselves against the white man's relentless blows. They were free, playing their own music. They were loved, perhaps for the first time. The notes flying out of the cornets and clarinets multiplied and fluttered in the air like butterflies. The drummers tapped, banged, and smashed as they set their own time, followed by the soul-shaking crash of cymbals. The trombones let out a glorious wail. The audience cried out in ecstasy. And thanks to the French for their hospitality, the band closed with the Marseillaise. The march swung for 12 bars before the audience recognized their own anthem. As the recognition dawned upon them, they jumped to their feet in absolute rapture. Jimmy elbowed David. They love us, man. Sergeant James Jimmy, Peyton's Journal. I'm hoping to write a book about this war. If I survive, that is. Last night was incredible. 3 amazing things happened all at once. Number 1, our band conquered France. Number 2, I think David fell in love. Number 3, we almost died in a German attack. Our concert drove those French folks crazy. I never felt more loved. The applause went on forever, and I felt so warm in there, like in a cocoon. I didn't want to leave. David was brilliant on his cornet solo, as always. I can only call him David in his journal. Out in the real world, he only wants to be called Sergeant Pierce. He never shows his feelings, but even he got caught up in the excitement. I could tell. We are soldiers sent to save these people, but we are their musicians too. When we're not in combat, our band tours the countryside to entertain the troops, the townsfolk, the wounded, and, well, the dead. This is just one part of a larger picture. Many of us here signed up for this war because we believe in Lieutenant James Reese Europe's vision. He says our doing well here will show the world the excellence of black men, and that will make things better for our people back home. But back to last night. It took us a long time to get out of the opera house because the townsfolk wanted to shake our black hands to thank us. Wow. We then get invited to this little club not too far away. It was cold outside, but we didn't care. The place had good food and drinks. The music was nice, but so different from ours. First time seeing an accordion. The walls were painted red, and there were candles on each of the covered tables, so the room felt cozy. David got a table, and I hit the bar for a minute. I overheard Grenade Tommy, a band member, talking with another of our bandmates, Percival Fox. Grenade Tommy was gruff and an expert with grenades, earning a rare title, Grenadier. "Which team?" Fox asked. "Montgomery Gray Sox," Tommy answered. "Very fine. Position?" "Third base." "Mm-hmm. Then you're just what I need," Fox said. "The hell you mean?" Tommy asked. "How we gonna play baseball while we dodging bullets?" Fox took a sip of his drink. "Same way we do back home." Grenade Tommy nodded. I joined David at a table near the stage. Smiling and fluffy feathered showgirls had been dancing the can-can just before. They were pretty, but you couldn't tell one from the other. But the singer who came after them, exotic, with just a touch of color into her smooth shoulders, bare shoulders, straps of sparkly blue and gold beads fastened at the back of her neck like a swan's neck, barely holding that silky, shapely dress up. Every man in the room wanted her, but we all knew we couldn't have her. Some things you just know. "Bonjour," she said. Then in English, "Club Paramore welcomes you. A round of applause for our brave American friends. My name is Giselle, and we are the Bone Wheat Band." What impressed me most was her rich voice, singing those old, sad French songs as if she'd lived each one. She and David stared at each other all night, and I realized they'd already made each other's acquaintance. When her set was done, they just walked up to each other on the dance floor like it was old times. He was tall and handsome, and she was beautiful. They were like a portrait of a moment in time. After a while, David brought her over to our table. "Bonjour, mademoiselle," I said as I kissed her hand. I was showing off my new French. She was pleasant enough, but there was this watchfulness about her. They were deep in conversation. He called her Songbird. I didn't eavesdrop, but I didn't need to. They were in their own world. I was getting up to give them some privacy when all of hell opened up right in front of us. This French guy walked up all proper. He was tall with blonde hair, probably what the ladies would call handsome. Well-dressed, but real stiff. He yanked up Giselle and ignored David. He told her it was time to leave. Poor David. He looked confused, then angry as he sized up French guy. When French guy pulled on Giselle's arm again, David jumped to his feet. I jumped up too. My thinking was French guy would have to get past the both of us. But Giselle shocked us by suddenly walking off with French guy. She didn't even look back. David tried to follow, but I pulled him back thinking we didn't know what that story was. Just as I was about to say so, there was a huge boom and everything went black. When I opened my eyes, all I could see was darkness. I smelled smoke. I heard women screaming. All around us, feet were shuffling. I realized I was on the floor. David appeared above me and he was shouting. I shouted back, "What?" because my ears were ringing. David cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Blast!" I understood then. We were under attack. As I started to rise, I heard the tat-tat-tat of machine guns. "Down!" David shouted. He shoved me back to the floor. We drew our pistols and dashed behind an overturned table to use it for cover. We had been trained how to take cover just the other day. I remember David shouting, "Two hostiles, 12 o'clock. I saw 2 Germans barging through the front doors. A classic sneak attack with an explosion, then follow up with gunfire. Just learned about that too. It dawned on me that they could kill every one of us in there. Suddenly, David fired 2 quick shots at the men in the doorway and they both went down. David is known as an expert shot. Hope I can hit good one day." This was the first time in my life using a gun. We scrambled to the front, careful to watch the door for more soldiers. Mostly everyone in the club had rushed to the back to hide under tables. David came face to face with one of our so-called fellow soldiers from the American Expeditionary Forces, the AAF. It was O'Dowd. He didn't like him. He didn't believe that Negroes should be serving in this war. O'Dowd had been shot. David asked him how bad he was hit. O'Dowd frowned and answered with, "Not bad. Sorry to disappoint you." He was a smart ass. David said, "Yeah, I am disappointed, but even I won't leave you to the Krauts. Come on." David lifted O'Dowd from the floor, supporting the big guy. I helped. "Corporal Peyton," David shouted. "Yes, sir," I shouted back. "We're getting out of here. Watch the door. It'll be like Leonidas and the 300. Huh? I didn't know who that dude was, but we could have used 300 men at the time. We're shooting them as they come through that narrow-ass doorway. Oh, sir. Yes, sir." Just as I feared, 2 more pointy German helmets were rushing through the front door. We 3 opened fire, quickly taking them down. The other AEF soldier who came with O'Dowd, Fitzgerald, made it to the door and was waiting for us. Together, we American soldiers pressed forward through the door over the Germans' dead bodies and out into the dark night. I heard the sound of trucks pulling off. There was no sign of any other enemies nearby. A raid with civilians inside. Damn, David said with disgust. "Yeah," Fitzgerald said. He grabbed O'Dowd from David and gave him a brief look of gratitude for saving his friend. We all knew the unity wouldn't last, but it felt good anyway. David and I scouted some more. I was looking for Germans, but he was looking for someone else. Eventually, I said, "Well, at least we know she wasn't inside when it happened. I guess she's with Frenchie?" David didn't say a word. We all jumped into a Davidson Cadillac armored car and sped to the rail station to report on the attack. It was a tense trip back to base. Nobody said much of anything during that cold train ride through the darkness. That was my first encounter with the Germans, and I was still shaking after I was safely back at the base. David said nothing else before lights out. Despite everything that happened, despite nearly losing his life in a flash, I knew David's mind was on that woman. Oh, thanks. Thank you so much. After I take a quick swig, I'm going to read. Thank you. I'm going to read one other part for you, and then I'll take a few questions. Okay, Chapter 6. Aix-les-Bains Resort. Frenchmen in high hats with red ribbons watched the first American doughboys disembark their train. They were covered in mud from the trenches. A local band, made up of schoolboys and old men, tried its best at what they thought sounded like the Star-Spangled Banner. The townspeople watched the soldiers with curiosity. They had watched their own men march off to war, with few to none ever coming home again. But now their replacements had arrived. No one laughed aloud at the band, but it was hard to hide a chuckle at their earnest fumbling. The mayor and his staff proudly greeted the Americans with the customary peck on both cheeks. From out of nowhere, there was a sudden burst of sound like no other ever heard before. Lieutenant Europe and his band marched into the square, 40 mostly dark-skinned musicians, with a shock. They had arrived the night before and was ready to say bonjour. Their Marseillaise hit the crowd like a tidal wave, nearly knocking them off their feet. The crowd cheered and cried long after the final note had died away. Jimmy's journal. It's great here at the resort. We get hot water baths, nice shaves, clean haircuts. This is a former health resort, ruins from the Roman Empire, so I hear. Our primary assignment is to provide entertainment for the American and British troops, but it's been fun playing for the civilians because they appreciate us so much. Captain Major Forbes tells us we are going where no other American soldiers have stepped foot. We are on a mission of great importance. We are not merely musician soldiers of the American Army, but ambassadors from America. We take all that very seriously. This is our chance to show the world who we are, so we're working hard. Rehearsals in the mornings and concerts in the afternoons and evening. Most of the concerts are held in the casino, a 1,000-seat theater, but we play in the parks on Tuesdays and Fridays. We've also played at the Chambéry, an old cathedral not far from here, for church services. It's a favorite place of J.P. Morgan and the former home of Rousseau, another fellow I have to learn about. I've been spending time with Giselle's assistant, Amy. Giselle's band has suddenly appeared, and they are going to perform too. Amy makes me smile and listens to my every word, even though she doesn't understand half of my rambling. The first night, our band played over there, and the soldiers climbed up onto the tables and waved their caps. They begged us to play it over and over again. We've done so well here that our stay has been extended 2 more weeks. I know that David will be relieved to hear it. The moment David learned where Giselle and her band was staying, he sent her a note, all the while cursing himself for looking so eager. David's note to Giselle's camp. I knew I'd see you again. I'm not one for believing in fate, but here we are. When I saw you sitting in the garden near the fountain in Aix-les-Bains this morning, it was out of a dream. Just like in that dream, you were waiting for me. It was cold today, but the way the sun seemed to shine only on you. It looked like a page out of a book of fairy tales. You greeted me with such a beautiful smile. It's only right that we're put here together. It's a wonderful place, a temporary escape from this war. Soldiers come here to recuperate, and we entertain them. We're both doing a good thing, using music to lift their spirits, to heal them. I'll see you this evening at the casino for another Battle of the Bands. Oui, David. A French outpost just outside of Aix-les-Bains. Giselle, in a German commander's uniform, walked through the earthen pathway of her newly conquered outpost. She was followed by 2 of her junior officers, Weller and Schmidt, trusted officers who also played in her band on their tours. The 3 entered a room where the body of a French wireless operator sat propped up in the corner. Another German soldier guarded the machine. Report? Giselle asked in German. The machine is ready for your use, Commander, he replied. Giselle took a seat in front of the machine and typed a coded message. The other soldiers looked on in awe. It was a privilege to witness the legendary code writer at work. When she was done, Giselle swiveled in her seat to address Weller. Please inform Commander von Strucker that the false message has been sent and received by the enemy. She turned to the third soldier. And you, dispose of this body. I have wired to their command that all is still well. That will be all. The three soldiers saluted. Weller and Schmidt started to exit, but Giselle held Weller back. Commander, he asked, deliver this note to our man at the casino. He would get it to the asset. Weller took the note and left. Giselle watched the other soldier drag the operator from the room by his ankles. When everyone was out of sight, she vomited. Giselle's note to David after the next show. David, thank you for a lovely evening. I enjoyed our walk after the concert, even in the chilly air. The moon seems brighter when I'm with you. I like knowing that you enjoy many of the same things, good books, art, and all kinds of music. If not for the bombings, I would be happy to show you the Louvre in Paris. Thank you for the compliments on my band. But let me speak about your own band, Magnifique. I counted at least 40 players, the first foreign band to play La Marseillaise so well. Those dancing songs, they are the jazz, oui? You keep everyone dancing. I want to know more about this jazz. I accept your invitation to dinner. Giselle. P.S. Maino, I will not give you my real name just yet. You will have to keep guessing. Smile. One mild afternoon in Chambéry, David and Giselle's bands put on a combined show at an orphanage. Children sat wide-eyed in front rows of modern pews. Older women sat at each end of the row to keep the children orderly, but it wasn't necessary, for the children loved the show. Giselle and their accordion player, Michelle, opened with folk music. The youngsters smiled and clapped along with the bouncy tunes. Giselle encouraged them to join her in ringing rounds of Frere Jacques. David watched Giselle the entire time and found himself barely able to hold back a tear. In this holy place, full of innocence, Giselle looked angelic in her simple country dress. David knew that she was keeping things from him, but in that church, she was unmasked for a moment. As the Hellfighters played, the children did not see skin color. They were focused on the wonderful instruments that made so many interesting sounds. As Lieutenant Europe closed out with a crash of brass, wind, and cymbals, he spied movement from the corner of his eye. He turned to find the little boy standing and imitating his conducting. When the song was over, Lieutenant Europe walked over to the boy. The other children watched and giggled as the gentle giant handed over his baton. 3 and 4 and... Lieutenant Europe gestured for the band to play a simple tune for the miniature guest conductor, who led with authority. The audience went wild. Giselle watched the smiling children. Images of an orphanage from long ago flashed in her mind. Okay. That's the end of that chapter. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. So as you can see, there's a lot about Giselle that needs uncovering for the truth. But David is falling hard for her and has changed him as a person. And you'll see in the story the lengths he'll go to try to protect her and still fight in this war and fight the Germans and survive. So there's a lot going on. So thank you so very much. I can answer some questions if anybody was curious. Yes.
Okay, if you don't mind, since people are watching online, if someone's willing to ask their question into this microphone, that way they can hear your question too.
Well, thank you for all this.
Oh, thank you.
I'm curious. There's a great deal of detail in what you've read to us tonight.
Thank you.
And I'm wondering how you did your research in this.
Thank you. Well, the research took over 10 years, probably more like 15 years. Just research. books, books, books. But the interesting thing was there was hardly anything about these hellfighters in those books. So the research was helpful in the sense of just the war in general in France. But these finer details, it was harder. But, you know, I found a few books. And ironically, the most informative books have been within the last 10 years. There's some scholars that, you know, found out some things about the hellfighters and started to bringing this story out. So, yeah.
Thank you again for
Thank you.
your presentation. My question is regarding the, in many people's history, given the situation is very hard to find anything written or taped.
Yes.
And so we resort to the voice of the elders, the memories.
Yes.
Is there anything on your sources for that?
Anything in my what?
As a source for for information about your subject.
Yes. As I was saying, in the last 10 years, more books have come forward. They're uncovering this information about these soldiers. So they're a source, but they had to dig really deep in the records. A lot of the records are actually in France. There's more there about these soldiers because they really respect what they did for them. So they have more records than we do here in the U.S. Yeah. Any more questions? Or anything in general you want to know? Yes. Thank you.
Did you need to learn French?
Oh, well, I had a good amount of French in high school and college, so I always liked French, so that part wasn't hard for me, but I just enjoy learning about all of this, so yeah.
Okay, I think, unless there are any last questions, that there is now an opportunity to purchase a book or have a book signed. And thank you all for being here. Thank you so much for those readings. That was wonderful.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.